let's start out west because, as I said, out west we kind of have the easier job of filling out the top five. We're going to go for our top five and kind of the next tier. We'll just kind of lump those together after we go over our top five. But of course, at the top, it's going to be Caleb Williams at UFC, the reigning Heisman champion or Heisman Trophy winner, I should say. Cotton Bowl runner-up that we got to see in person. Shout out to Lane. But there's no reason to put Caleb Williams, not just number one in the Pac-12, but number one in all of college football. He is the best returning quarterback on paper and on the field. The stats say it. The eye test says it. He's going to go number one overall in the NFL draft. There were teams that punted on taking a quarterback this year when they really needed one, just so they would have the chance to take him in the NFL draft number one overall next year. So, yeah, I mean, is there anything that you're concerned about with Caleb Williams going into 2023?
Just maybe that he's not going to be as amazing as he was last year.
Yeah.
He's going to be great, but last year, I mean, was absolutely sensational. Threw the ball 500 times last year, passed for 4,500 yards, 66% completions, those 42 touchdowns, and only 5 interceptions is incredible. 168 passer rating on that. Doing ridiculous things. You did, mention the Cotton Bowl runner-up. That was not because of him. By
Absolutely not.
The
The USC defense, Mitch and I were there in person, and they
bad.
choked that away.
It was
a spectacular choke.
He completed 71% of his passes in that game for 462 yards, 5 touchdowns, and a 173 rating. That's stupid video game numbers, and they still couldn't beat Tulane.
You say those numbers too, and it doesn't even do justice of watching it in person, because that was the first time I had ever watched Caleb Williams in person. TV does not do him justice. Like, if you get a chance, if you're out on the West Coast, or if he's playing near you in a bowl game or something like that, he is worth the price of admission by himself, because our jaws were just on the floor constantly every time he was touching the football. So, yeah, I mean, is he going to live up to those gaudy numbers this year? Maybe, maybe not. I think the USC defense is going to be better this year. I don't think they're going to be elite by any stretch of the imaginations, but I think they'll be better. And so he might not be asked to put up 50 points a night to make sure USC wins a game. But yeah, I mean, he might not put up the gaudy numbers, but he's proven on the field that he is QB1 in the entire NCAA, not just the Pac-12.
Well, and you say that Tulane game was only his 5th best game according to passer rating. Like, if you're just looking at his passer rating through the year, that was only his 5th best game. He played, phenomenally across the board, start to finish last season. There wasn't really one game where you said, he kind of struggled there. I mean, you could maybe say Oregon State, where he wasn't as phenomenal, but across the board, it was just a great season for him. Probably the best player in college football this next season. Definitely the most important to his team. And I think it'll be a lot of fun to just kind of see where he ends up going, and not just where he goes this next year, but where he's ending up, in the future in his NFL career, seeing which team gets to scoop him up and just how high he can fly. Because I think we're looking at a really, really special quarterback.
If you needed yet another fun stat for Caleb Williams, he also averaged 42 yards per punt in 2022. So he punted twice against Notre Dame, and the average was 42 yards, which I think most college coaches would take that from their punters. So Caleb Williams at number one. Write it in Sharpie, lock it in. Behind Caleb Williams, I think the Pac-12, at least of the conferences we're talking today, has the most number of names in the top tier. I guess I'll phrase it that way. There weren't a lot of debate outside of what order to put them in on guys that should be in the top 4. Number 2, 3, 4 for us, we decided to go the order of Michael Penix Jr. at Washington at number 2, Bo Nix at Oregon at number 3. And I can't wait to talk about Bo Nix, which is not a phrase that I would have thought I would be saying this time last year. And Cam Rising at Utah, who has just been Mr. Consistent out there in Salt Lake City. So, Garrett, let's start with Penix Jr., because I think coming over from Indiana, there was a lot of hope that he would provide a spark to Washington's offense. And he just far, far outseeded expectations last year in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, absolutely. He's fantastic. Now, he did end up beating Caleb Williams in passing yardage, but the caveat to that is he did end up throwing the ball like 50 more times than he did too. He was, slinging it last season. But not to take away from anything he did pass for 4,600 yards on 65% completions, 31 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. If it wasn't for the fact that Caleb Williams is in this conference, he's probably the best in whatever conference he's in.
Yeah.
He's a fantastic quarterback and really gave Washington a jolt there from a team that I never really thought of as an offensive juggernaut. I never really looked at Washington and thought, oh, those guys are going to put up massive points. Those guys are going to really threaten you. They ended up winning a lot of games and scoring a lot of points behind this really, really good offense. He scored 4 touchdowns. I'm looking at it 4 times last year. A lot of quarterbacks don't pass for 4 touchdowns at all in their career. He did it 4 times in a season. He's an excellent player, very, very good, very talented, and I think probably a steal in whatever the next draft is, wherever he ends up going. He's probably a steal for whatever team picks him up next year.
Yeah, he is my Hendon Hooker watch for this year, because I think Hendon Hooker, he put up gaudy numbers his first season at Tennessee after winning that starting job. But then this past year in 2021 or 2022, excuse me, he really burst onto the scene, especially with that Alabama game.
Yeah.
I'm pulling up Washington's schedule right now. I didn't have that pulled up, but I think that Penix Jr. is not necessarily a household name at this point. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I wouldn't necessarily call him a household name at this point.
Yeah, he's someone that if you watch college football, you know about him. But if you're just kind of a casual fan of maybe just your team or your conference, you may not have heard of him yet.
Yeah. And I think he's going to have some opportunities to really burst onto the scene this year. I mean, they play Oregon every year, obviously, but November 4th, he's going head to head against Caleb Williams at the Coliseum. And that's a game that I'm kind of penciling in. Like, we'll do our college game day predictions like we did last year here pretty soon on social media, but that's a game that I'm definitely penciling in for college game day. I think that's going to be a national audience. USC's last season in the Pac-12 before, jetting off to the Big Ten. That's going to be an opportunity for Michael Penix Jr. to cement himself and maybe a Heisman candidacy season. I don't think that's going too far because he can absolutely carry his team. Washington's a dark horse playoff contender to me because of Michael Penix Jr.
Yeah, no, he could lead this team to the playoff. I mean, it's not absurd to say it. I know that the Pac-12 doesn't do very well getting teams into the playoff in the first place, but if you're going to say it's going to be anybody, I don't think that it's too far of a stretch to say Washington has as good of a shot as any other team in that conference, simply because if you look across the rest of the conference, we're only saying that USC has a better quarterback, and they had holes to fill on that defense. They will be better on defense. How much better still remains to be seen. Go beat Tulane before I'll talk about you as an actual playoff contender. And that's not to shade Tulane. They're a very good team last year, but if you want to be a college football playoff contender, you shouldn't be losing to Tulane. And look, Washington, for all the flaws and for all the issues that they have on their schedule, they had a 2-week stretch of bad football last year, and that's it. And they could very well have been in the playoff contention if it weren't for just a couple bad weeks on the road, where things kind of spiraled. So I'm really curious to see where Washington ends up. But you could say a Rose Bowl. A Rose Bowl could definitely be in play here. It wouldn't shock me to watch them win the conference. That would be, even if they don't make the playoff, they could win the conference for sure.
Yeah, they were a tiebreaker. They were a weird tiebreaker award away from going to the Pac-12 title game last year and competing for a spot in the Rose Bowl. So absolutely possible. And I would say likely at this point that they're at least in New Year's 6 game. Next on our list, we'll kind of lump these next two together. They deserve their own spotlight, but just for time's sake. Bo Nix at number 3 at Oregon, Cam Rising at Utah. Garrett, week 1 last year, we thought, oh boy, here we go again with Bo Nix after that performance against Georgia. I think he got pulled in that game, if I'm remembering correctly. Like it was rough. It was a rough going, not just for Bo Nix, but for that entire Oregon team, offense, defense, special teams, just a rough all around performance. After that, he threw just 5 interceptions the rest of the season, including their bowl game against North Carolina. If you tell me that Bo Nix is only going to throw 5 interceptions over the course of 12 games, like I don't think I would have believed that going into last year. He took care of the football, and he not only just managed games well, he was the reason that Oregon was competitive down the stretch.
Oh, for sure. And obviously, look, his struggles at Auburn are well documented at this point. I think that has a lot more to do with where Auburn was as a program the last couple of years, and he just was the unfortunate, talented quarterback at the top of that schedule. And yeah, obviously they didn't compete with Georgia, but if you're going to say that not competing very well against Georgia is cause to say that you're a bad quarterback or anything else, I mean, you're going to have to look up and down that list because Hendon Hooker didn't play that good against Georgia. And oh yeah, by the way, that TCU quarterback, Max Duggan, he didn't play too good against him either in the national championship game. So playing poorly against a very talented Georgia defense, I don't think should cost you anything. But yeah, after that, it was fantastic numbers. He did complete 71% of his passes, 3,500 yards, almost 3,600 yards, 29 touchdowns, and a 165 rating on the year. He's great. He's a really good quarterback. And I think his resurgence was kind of the most, I think, unheralded storyline of the season. Nobody talked about it, but I think everyone should have been talking about it. He brought Oregon back to national relevance as far as the national conversation went. And he did a lot for that program to look a lot more valid in terms of what they're able to accomplish on offense than they had looked in previous years. Obviously, Justin Herbert, good quarterback a few years ago, but I think Bo Nix kind of brought something else to that team. And they just were really resilient all year long. I saw not a lot of quitting them. And they were real close to being, again, in that Pac-12 championship game and being able to compete for their conference in year one under Coach Dan Lanning.
Yeah, and he made that transition really, really easy. Another guy that's making things easy is Cam Rising. I mean, if he's the quarterback, you're just penciling in Utah to Las Vegas at this point, aren't you? Like I
You're
mean, it's
penciling in a trophy at this point.
yeah.
This
I
is
mean,
you said Cam Rising. Let's get his title right. That's back-to-back conference champion Cam Rising to you.
yeah.
He's a great quarterback, and again, probably one of the more slept-on guys nationally. His numbers are never like amazing necessarily. He doesn't put up the same like just general statistics the other guys have. But again, 64% completions, over 3,000 yards, 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions in a team that is very run heavy, in a team that is very physical and not necessarily going to be a blow you away offense. That's what you want out of your quarterback. You want a guy who's going to be competitive. He can push it when he needs to. And again, let's talk about his performances over the course of the year. In a game against USC, he completes 64% of his passes, 310 yards, and 3 touchdowns to win the conference. Earlier that season against let me find it. USC, he threw for 415 yards and 2 touchdowns on 68% as well. So
And had 3 on the ground in that game too.
yeah, and so when the lights turn on and the lights are bright, Cam Rising seems to turn it on. Now, bad performance against Penn State. I think we all think Penn State's a playoff contender.
And he was injured in that game.
He did get injured in that game,
right?
as well.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't great before he was injured. He completes 8 of his 21 passes, not fantastic. But again, Penn State, a very good defense, a very good team that I think everyone expects a lot of this next year. So Cam Rising, I think, is one of the more underappreciated players. I think a lot of people have called him a bus driver in previous years. He's not a bus driver. He's a very talented quarterback on a physical run-first team who can, when you need him to, step up and really pass the football.
And I think that's a great point too. I think throughout this series, you're going to hear us talking about a player just doing what their team needs them to do. And so Cam Rising is never going to have the numbers that Michael Penix or Caleb Williams have because he's not asked to do that. Mm-hmm. But he is going to, I mean, he's not a bus driver, but he is going to drive the bus. He's going to run a run-first offense extremely well. And when he needs to throw, especially in the red zone, he's going to be deadly, targeting the tight ends and targeting the other options that Utah has. It's just a different offense, so he's not going to put up the crazy numbers. Our number 5 spot might surprise some people. If you follow the Pac-12 closely, I don't know that you necessarily will, but off the field stuff aside, if we're focusing just on the field talent, we have Jayden de Laura from Arizona at number 5. And so, people have kind of written off Arizona the last few years. I don't blame them because it has not been pretty. It's not been a good product that they put on the field. But Arizona is a team that is looking extremely different than what they did, just a couple years ago in the Kevin Sumlin era. And a big part of that is Jayden de Laura coming in as a transfer and really taking the reins of this offense and showing what he could do. He was good at Washington State, but he took it to another level last year in his first year at Arizona. So, Garrett, I guess our next tier after that, we chose to put de Laura in over Cam Ward at Washington State. And then the two unproven guys that we think could be on this list by the end of the year, Shedeur Sanders at Colorado and Dante Moore, especially. Mm-hmm. Remember Dante Moore's name, because by the end of the year, he could legitimately be top 3 in this conference, I think. So any thoughts on, just people that might question why we put de Laura in over those guys?
Yeah, I think the big factor in putting de Laura over a guy like Cameron Ward really just came down to simply the numbers. I think they're pretty comparable players. I think they're both good players who are going to make some mistakes that might cost you, but are also going to make some plays that keep you in games. At the end of the day, he passed for 400 more yards and had a better passer rating, so we just ended up putting him in over it because statistically he was better. But you could probably interchange de Laura or Cam Ward. The reason we don't go with guys like Dante Moore or Shedeur Sanders is because we have no idea what they're going to bring to the field. Both of these guys could be top 3 in the conference by the end of the year. I could see either of these guys pushing out Bo Nix, or maybe Penix Jr. was kind of a 1 year and done type of situation. Either one of these guys are talented enough to push either of those two guys out. I'm not going to put them above Caleb Williams at this point. That's ridiculous. But either one of those guys are talented enough, I think, to push those guys out. And we don't know what's going to happen at Colorado. We've kind of pumped the brakes on the Colorado hype train on this podcast a little bit, but we'll acknowledge that things could turn around to Colorado and they could have a pretty solid team next year. And Dante Moore at UCLA, we saw what DTR was able to do at UCLA. And I think Dante Moore is a similar type player, if not, I think, a better natural passer than what DTR was. And so if he develops, and depending on how quickly he picks up the offense, I think you could see him end up being a really, really good player in year one. We're just not confident enough at this point to put him on that list.
Yeah, and I think the biggest argument, going back to de Laura, I think the biggest argument against him is he just hasn't won anything, and he hasn't delivered wins for Arizona. You look at the roster that he's given to compete with. I don't think that you can necessarily put that blame on him. He does turn the ball over a lot. He does force things a lot at times. If he can improve on that, he could definitely move up these rankings as well as we look at the end of this year.
Gracious him! How about that?